first is our moderator. Please welcome Shaheem Williams of Conjuring Literacy. He's an English professor and book content creator from Oxford, North Carolina, who centers Black speculative fiction in his work and content as he explores the depth of Black imagination. Give it up for my friend, y'all. Up next, we have fiction author who wrote the short story collection Friday Black and his debut novel Chain Gang All-Stars, named one of 5 under 35 authors by the National Book Foundation in 2018 and won the PEN/Gene Stein Book Award in 2019, Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. Then we have Canadian author of epic fantasy. His first novel, The Rage of Dragons, was originally self-published in 2017. In 2020, Time named it one of the 100 best fantasy books of all time. Give it up for Evan Winter. And lastly, storyteller, teaching artist, and community organizer from Atlanta. He's also the winner of several Indie Book Awards for multicultural fiction, H.G. Hunter. Woo!
What's up, SFS? How y'all doing tonight?
Yo.
I want to first thank y'all for having me. Thank y'all for showing up, and thank y'all for joining me on the stage today. And we're just gonna kick it off. So I want to start off by evoking an ancestor whose name is actually on one of these walls. In What White Publishers Won't Print, Zora Neale Hurston states, white publishers hardly engage with the interesting problem of race, as they are not in the business to educate, but to make money. What is an aspect of your book that you really had to advocate for to include with your publishers and editors?
I can start. And first off, thank y'all for being here. This is my first Essence Fest, so I'm feeling really grateful. Yeah. I think when you think about publishing, the whiteness of publishing, and it goes from like, it's very hard to get a Black agent, it's very hard to get a Black publisher, all through the spectrum of publishing, this whiteness is sort of prevalent. I've been lucky though that my team has been they kind of know who I am. I'm kind of, I guess, Black issues have been a part of my project from the beginning, so they've been pretty much, they've been pretty accommodating for me, but there's been periods where I want to write something in a different language, for example, and I don't feel like I want to explain it or like try to translate it to make it more legible to whiteness. And I had to sort of explain to my editor, like, sometimes it's okay for whiteness to be on the outside as opposed to being the center. And so on a line level, just being willing to know that, thinking of myself and how I see the world as the center, and not sort of like translating or like white translating, you know, not being willing to do that has been probably the most prevalent example I can think of.
Yeah, what's up, y'all? I write for kids exclusively, and so I think there's a lot of complexity when you're doing narratives about people who are in a formative stage of life. And I thought so long about this question, Shaheem. I was like, it was like so many things that I was gonna pick out, like they hate on this, and they hate on this, and they hate on this. But the thing that really, I think, is prevalent across all of my projects is like the inner life of the young Black male, because that's who's at the center of my stories. I have an adventure series where there's fun things happening, and there's danger, and there's action, and in a lot of ways, my publisher is like, that's cool, that's enough. And for me, it's not quite the same. I'm thinking about what would it feel like to be a Black boy going through these situations that are fun and perilous to a degree, but also have real life implications, right? We have like a young kid and they're trying to save the world and fighting for their life, and does that not have an impact on their mental health, right? And so I want to take up space so that they can have time to reflect, so that they can make friends, so that they can experience some of the joy. And I feel like a lot of times in publishing, not understanding how complex it is to live in these bodies with the skin in this world, it'll be like, well, that's not really an important part of the story. Right? Get back to the plot, get back to the narrative. But to me, it's just as important as everything else that's going on. So that complexity is the main thing that I think is hard to convey, and something that I really had to stand on business about when folks want to minimize it.
Okay, can everybody hear me? All right, cool. So yeah, I think the questions about You want to, actually, if you hit me with that one more time.
What is an aspect of your book that you had to advocate for to include in with your publisher and editor?
Okay, so what aspect of my books did I have to advocate so that the publisher would leave it in as opposed to trying to exclude it or push it to the side? I think I've been pretty fortunate in that the publisher and my editor specifically didn't try to exclude anything or push my story in any direction other than the direction I was trying to take it into. I think that's also when the job is being done the best by the publisher or the editor, because they're there, in my opinion, to help support our vision as writers to the best of their ability. Their job is to help us tell the story that we're already trying to tell as best we can tell it. So if anybody out here wants to be a writer or plans to, or does any sort of creative work, the most important thing that you have is your voice, your specific perspective on life and on the world that comes through your experiences. Don't let that be diluted, because it's easy to say, especially for big corporations or companies that want to make money, right? They want to push everything to the middle to make everything as palatable as possible for everybody. But the power of story, the power comes through your personal experience, that comes through your voice. So when you speak with your own voice as clearly and as loudly as you can, that's when you have the best chance to touch other people, to make them see what you see and to make them feel what you feel. We are all different, we are all unique, but at the same time, the human experience overlaps enough that we can find points of connection when we speak as clearly and as powerfully and as loudly as we can about who we are. So no matter what publishers say or anybody else tells you, if you are a creative, speak with your own voice, tell your story as loudly and as clearly as possible.
All right, thank y'all. So my first individual question is going to you, Evan. So Tao is one of the first main characters who was a black boy who I felt like had the right to be angry, and we were able to see his rage without like a commodification of it. So my question is, how can Tao's simultaneous attempts to turn pain to power and his descent to madness serve as a lesson for black boys in oppressive environments for more sustainable black futures?
Okay. So it's a good question. Why is my main character so angry? I think that as I look around this room, it shouldn't ever be that hard to understand frustration and anger at the way the world is. In my book, the world is not how it should be. It is not equitable. The status quo is not a positive thing. And he is angry because he feels the weight of that society. He feels the weight that it puts on his shoulders. He feels the limits that it places on his possibilities. And he wants to resist that and break free of that and become as human as everybody else on the top claims that they are, and tries to deny him. They try to deny him his full humanity. So he fights against that. And so that rage, that frustration, that anger is a natural, and I would actually argue it is a righteous outcome from being treated as less than. So yeah, I guess that's it. It is righteous, it is right, and when the world puts a weight on your shoulders, when a world tries to oppress you, it wants you to say, it wants you to come to terms with that or to resist ultimately, peacefully and calmly. And that almost always is an excuse to maintain that same level of oppression on you. So I would say, oftentimes it feels like that main character is going mad with the anger and the rage, but I would say that look at madness is what the oppressor says when they are looking at the actions you take to free yourself. It's not madness, it's righteousness.
Thank you. All right, HD. So across your 3-book series, Futureland, we get to meet Cam and his interactions with his parents and his uncle. So my question is, what themes, lessons, and values can adult readers gain from co-reading with kids to discuss generational gaps in efforts to bridge communication and mitigate generational toxic practices between families?
You really did your thing with these questions, boy.
Yeah, I was like, that's a good question.
Yeah, what? Okay, so I love kids, y'all. I always have. I was a camp counselor for the first time in my life when I was 15. And looking back, my campers were like 12, so I don't know who put me in charge. It definitely was a liability, but that's how they did it. And so my whole life, I've just been like so invested in the lives of young people. And as I've gotten older, I don't have any kids of my own, but through visits to schools, and I actually sub at a school in Atlanta where I live, I get a chance to be around young people all the time. And they tell me stuff that they don't tell some of y'all because it's not the same level of intimacy, it's not the same boundaries, right? And so I have a chance to get to know them in ways that feel so precious to me. And so as I was creating this series, this narrative, I wrote the first book for the kids. I want to make it interesting. I want to make it fun. And the second book and the third book are obviously for them too, but I tried to do a little something different with each installment. And the second installment is really for parents. If you think about what we have going on, there's this kid. His parents are the foremost technologists and engineers in the world. They've created a theme park that you don't have to go visit because the entire park will lift up and travel from city to city to city to city, so it will visit you. His parents have built this empire, and of course, they want their only child, their only son, to be the person who inherits it and keeps it going, right? But he has a different dream, and that unfolds, right? He finds out what he really likes to do, and he wants to follow that path. In addition to that, he's trying to solve all these mysteries and face all these social ills that Evan is talking about and see how he can make a difference in the world. And that's not an easy thing for parents to come to terms with, right? You have a vision for your young person, and they have a separate vision for themselves. They're acting in ways that you feel like might be dangerous or might go against your better wisdom, but to them, it's what I need to do to self-actualize. It's what I need to do to feel like I'm my own person. And so I think there's a beautiful journey for our main character, this 11 and 12-year-old boy who starts to grow up and starts to come into himself. But there's also a really beautiful journey for the parents to learn what it means to support a child, to guide a child, to be there for a child, and not to pull them up out of the ground right as they grow, but to raise them and to nurture them and to accept some things that might need to be accepted even though they're tough. And so, yeah, it's a story about like just this familial love. When we pitched the idea, that was one of my deal breakers. I was like, I don't want any black family drama. Like, the family got to be exactly what I want it to be, because we know enough of the rest of the stories, right? And it can be challenging without it being troublesome. And so that's what I wanted to put into the story. I wanted to put into a look of how a family really loves each other throughout everything that they could face.
Thank you. All right, Nana. So, as y'all know, America has been going through some very interesting things lately. And in Chain Gang All-Star, we kind of see a reality that can happen based off of what's going on. So my question is, what does the text say about human behavior in a time of crisis, specifically in a dystopia?
I like how you put that, interesting things. So just real quick, the novel Chain Gang All-Stars is about an imagined future where convicted wards of state can opt out of a sentence of at least 25 years and participate in death matches. The book ends up thinking a lot about incarceration and how inequitable and sort of violent the prison system is. And to answer your question, I think the interesting things in America are we are becoming more and more aware of sort of the myriad and endless inequities that exist. We're sort of getting more and more aware and attuned of the inherent racism in the project of America. We're starting to get more in tune to just the wealth disparities that are sort of built into our systems. And we're like struggling to negotiate against that because a lot of these like ills are really built and baked right into the heart of all of our most sort of essential institutions. And so anyways, all to say we have a lot of problems. A lot of bad shit is happening. and sometimes you hit crisis points. And I think the book is thinking about how when violent systems arise, there's a lot of different things that can happen. Sometimes the pressure that we're all under makes us look at each other as enemies, as competition. But another thing can also happen is that the pressure that these systems are putting on us could sometimes force us or ask us or push us towards holding each other with a little bit more compassion. Thinking about, wait, maybe there isn't a difference between your well-being and my well-being. I think the pandemic gave a good example of that. Your healthcare is my healthcare in a very literal way. And so I think the book is reminding us that we have a choice of how we respond to the difficulties, which are everywhere. And compassion might be a way that we can respond and sort of hold each other just a little bit better in a way that can sustain us for longer in a real way. It's a great question.
Thank you. Evan, Tao is bombarded by a everything, everywhere, all at once level of conflict. What critique on human life in the midst of war and imperialism do we get from reading the series?
Okay, what critique on human life do we get from the series? I think basically the series does talk a lot about imperialism and war. And for me, a key aspect of imperialism is its attempt to say that, yeah, we're all human, but some of us are more human than the rest. And that's a large part of what it does and what it tries to do to separate and to also be able to justify the exploitation of others. And so the book is trying to sort of take a long, lingering look at that and to say, what does this mean? Who gets to do that defining of humanness, okay? Why are they doing it? And what are most often the outcomes from doing that? And again, most often the outcomes are exploitation, mass murder, violence, and then the book tries to say and explore how we move through that. How can we maybe break out of a system that does that to us, that says that some people are more people than other people, right? And I think that's a key and very important thing that it's a big question for me even. Like, how do we move beyond the idea of either an explicit or an implicit caste system? Nationally, globally, in all those kind of ways, where some people, their wants, their desires, their dreams, their goals are looked at as having more value, more importance, and treated with more respect than the dreams, wants, goals, desires of a whole other groups of people, right? Who gets the benefit of the doubt in things, right? And who doesn't? So the book talks about all that stuff, tries to explore it, and then tries to figure out, at least through the perspective of one character and the group of people around that character, what one path forward might look like. Yeah.
Thank you. Hugh, in your books, in the Futureland series, each book has a different subgenre, and all three attack like a different social justice issue. So in book one, you pay homage to the Atlanta child murders and the ambivalence and apathy to missing black children. What are some of the issues that you talk about in book two and book three?
Yeah, wow. So like you said, every book has sort of a different focus. And the first one, starting with the Atlanta child murders, I was born and raised in Atlanta, West Side. In the 70s and 80s, there were, depending on how you count it, about 30-some odd black children that disappeared from the West Side of Atlanta. And I mean, there's a lot of shows about this. If anybody's ever seen Mindhunter, or I can't think of it, but there's a bunch of podcasts and shows that reference this occurrence in the city of Atlanta. Basically, local law enforcement took too long, didn't take it seriously, because these are people in every city that the powers that be don't think too highly of, right? They're not too concerned with. So a year of black kids disappearing, finally they're like, okay, well, maybe we should do something about it. The FBI had to get called in. It was a whole deal. And Futureland 1 was actually my first time writing about Atlanta. I had never written anything about home, so I was really excited to put all of this history and all of these references inside the text, kind of as like my respect to the place that brought me forth to the rest of the world. In the second book, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Trump City before. Trump City was a project, I think in the late 80s, where Donald Trump was basically trying to like create his own miniature city within New York, and invite different corporations to come there and invite very wealthy people to come live there. But it was supposed to be this small like enclave of elitism, super duper elitism, like within New York City, and be sort of walled off from the rest of the city. And so I'm talking a lot about gentrification in book 2, which I know is happening to all of our neighborhoods all across the nation and the world. But I'm also talking about these actors that would decide our fate for us if they could, right? That are talking in these back channel sort of communications and making plans for our land, our bodies, our futures, without us being privy to it sometimes and without our consent. And that is heavily explored in book 2. The team actually travels from Atlanta to New York for the second book. So we get to be there and kind of understand placed in a different way and understand who's in charge versus who they tell us is in charge, all of those sorts of things. The third book is a little bit of a departure from the first two. We got 2 mysteries, and then we have just a pure adventure novel. The kids and their teammates go to Cairo, Egypt for like the final showdown. And I think that one is less issues focused, but at least for our main character, he's grown up in this theme park his whole life, and it's the best thing in the world, right? Like, not just to him, but to everybody else. There's nothing outside Futureland that is better than is inside the park because it's a view at what the world could be. At least he thinks so. My project with the last book was to really show how a kid can grow up and be super resourced and be super loved and super well taken care of, but there's no substitute for having the opportunity to go out into the world and meet people and explore things and experience things. And when Cam gets to Cairo, Egypt, and he meets the local people there, and he starts to learn about a different culture, and it's not so much about what's going on in his park with his family and his friends, that's a big part of him growing up too. It's just the exposure to other magic and other futuristic things, other things beyond belief that aren't just contrived by his parents. So yeah, each one kind of has its own different flavor, but I hope they all work together to create this really beautiful story about not just things going wrong, but things going right.
Thank you. And Nana. So for y'all who don't know, I'm a PhD student, and my dissertation is looking at using archival material and like factual data and speculative fiction and like what's the implications of that. Of course, your book does that amazingly. I read it and I fell in love. Like, I need to add this to my dissertation. But my question is, what was your process in weaving historical anecdotes, facts, and statistical data into the text, and why was that important to the narrative?
I appreciate the question, and I'll be honored to be in your dissertation. That'd be dope. And listen to all the answers. I see why we're on the same panel together, so like I see what y'all did there. Good job. So my book has footnotes, even though it has like that very speculative, almost sci-fi premise. I have a lot of footnotes. Some of the footnotes are about issues in the world of the book, and some of them are like case law from a specific court case in real life. Some of the footnotes cite the American Constitution. Some of the footnotes think about the lives of people like Albert Woodfox, who spent over 40 years in solitary confinement in Parchment Farms, Mississippi. What I was thinking about when I did that was I wanted it to be impossible to read the book as just about some woman hitting someone over the head with a hammer. I wanted to like really ground the work in something real, in a real text. The example I sometimes give is, I don't know if you ever seen the show Squid Game. Squid Game was thinking a lot, as you might know, about sort of our economic disparities and like capitalism at large. One time I was talking to, it was actually my PT, and he brought up Squid Game, and I was like, oh, bet. We're about to talk bad about capitalism, which is one of my pastimes. And when I started talking about capitalism, he was like, wait, why are you talking about that? And essentially, he had watched the whole Squid Game and never thought about what Squid Game is really about one time. And that is very scary to me. And so when I wove those things in, I wanted to remind the reader that even though this book is sort of entertaining and there's sort of a thrilling aspect, the premise is built on a very real and sad reality, which is that we have a system that totally destroys our ability to respond compassionately to the disease of addiction. We have a system that currently individualizes and criminalizes systemic issues like poverty. We have a system that totally cuts at the knees our ability to respond with true heart or compassion to mental health crises. And all these things are true in so many ways, I couldn't even name them all. But I wanted that like sad truth to be really unforgettable. And I think the footnotes and the weaving of the actual found text ground that book in a familiar reality that makes the quote-unquote fun of the book a little more damning. It's a great question, again.
Thank you. So this panel was amazing. When I found out about who my panelists were, I immediately fell in love because each one of these books did something special for me. HD, you gave me an opportunity to read a black boy who was able to dream and persevere through his dreams. Evan, you gave me an example of a black boy who was anger and who was able to turn his anger into power and move up through the ranks. And Nana, as a child, as an incarcerated person, you really wrote a book that kind of spoke to incarcerated people and their families and how that impacts their lives and like the advocates for them. Like you had so many perspectives of what like incarceration does to the American system. These are very powerful books. If you haven't gotten to pick them up yet, please go pick them up. But my final question for you all, in a genre that's dominated by black women, especially when you think about like Octavia Butler and all of these other like black women who have dominated speculative fiction, y'all are black men who are doing the thing. So I wonder, what is your experience as a black male speculative writer, and what are some of your hopes and visions for the future within your work and the genre at large?
I'm gonna tell a real quick story about going to DC earlier this year. I was in like maybe 8 or 9 public schools over the course of a few days, and we were doing writing workshops. And I was asking young black kids mostly to think about what they see in their neighborhood that they don't like, and then to use a magical premise or a scientific premise to change it. One boy came up with the idea, he said that there's a lot of theft. There's a lot of theft from corner stores and other things going on, and he has friends that get in trouble, and he has friends that get hurt because of the responses to this sort of dynamic. And he said, what if everything in the store was a hologram? So you filled up your holographic cart, you checked out, you walked out of the store with nothing, but when you got home, your items were either there or got delivered. We will work on that part later, but he had the premise of this story, and it came so fast, and I was like, have you thought of this already? And he was like, nah, I never thought about this until you asked. And so when I think about like the question that you're asking about black men and our place in spec and the future of what it can be and what it should be, the dearth of that till now, or the lack of that till now, to me just really means that there are even more stories and even more visions for our collective black future that aren't necessarily integrated all the way yet. And that's my vision. That's what I want. I want as many young black boys to feel like this is a space that they belong in and that they deserve and have, a part of cooperative ownership in, so that as we continue to dream out and to vision out, what they think is included too, and they can contribute, their amount, their ideas, their love to the vision of all of our future.
I love that answer, and it speaks to like how I think about speculative fiction and any sort of kind of fiction in general. Because there's some men who I know I've seen in real life who are like, I don't read fiction, I just read nonfiction. And it's like a way for them to feel better than other people. And I think it's a sad, I'm laughing about it, but it's kind of sad because I think the most important human power is imagination. And not just like in a imagination fun way, but in a genuine, how can this be something different? Because if you only rely on what's in front of you to inform what could be, you're just going to be in a circle all the time. You can't really make real progress. And so I think the speculative space is a chance for both the reader and writer to stretch that essential human power, which is imagination, and do exactly what that young person just did. And you have to be able to do that. That is if you can't do that, you can't build new systems, you can't build new institutions, you can't build a new, better life. And so when these people, particularly men, say that, I actually get genuinely sad about it, because men are allowed to exist in this very narrow space. They can't be too angry. They can't ever be sad, God forbid. They can't read fiction somehow that fits into almost like loftiness or whatever. They gotta wear this certain kind of boring shit over here. It's a very small, boring lane for men to exist. And I think speculative fiction and speculative fiction authors are sort of reminding us that we can push past that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything that everyone's saying up here. And I guess for me, I think that stories have an incredible amount of power. Perhaps it's a little bit self-serving, but I really do feel that in the same way that, the pantheon of the gods and the big myths were what were told in ancient Greece or ancient Rome to help people understand and make sense of the world around them and their connections with each other, I think that that's what stories do nowadays. One of the biggest sources of soft power that, for example, America has is the cultural export of its stories. It helps tell the world what to think about how things are, how things should be. And an important part of that is that we, I think, especially like the people in this room, if any of you want to be storytellers, we need to tell more of our stories as part of that overall fabric so that people can see us more clearly, so that we can let the rest of the world experience the world as we see it. Because if we don't do that, then all the stories that get all the stories that get told, all the myths that are made are not myths that are being told with us in their favor. So, like, again, I don't know if anybody out here wants to be a storyteller, but if you do, your voice is needed and your voice is important. I think that if we tell all these stories, we get a chance to maybe make it so that we start to see each other more clearly as human beings of equal merit, value, and worth. And if we can get that to happen well enough, we can maybe start to take out one of the load-bearing pillars of inhumanity, which is that lie that some people are worth more than others. So by telling our stories, we can maybe eliminate that. And if we can eliminate that, the world changes, and I believe it changes for the better.
All right. Thank y'all so much. Make some noise for the panelists.
Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Y'all.